Sidney Dekker said, once you know the outcome, every decision looks obviously wrong. Think about the last movie you watched that had a twist ending. The first time you saw it, maybe the twist surprised you, and that surprise was the point. Now imagine watching the same movie again, and suddenly every line of dialogue and every glance feels like an obvious clue. You find yourself thinking, how did I even miss that? Nowadays, they just keep making the same movies over and over again with different names and different actors, I swear. So now it's not the same. But years ago, I used to be surprised by the twists. But now I'm just like, okay, here you go. Okay, yep, that's about to happen. Okay, they're setting this up for, let me see, we're just guessing. Will it be halfway through or just 5 minutes later? Okay, by the end of the movie, this is what's going to happen. It's just been overdone and overdone and overdone. But regardless, it's not the same as the first time, because the first time we were actually surprised. The first time we didn't recognize those clues because we hadn't seen it before. And nothing in the movie changed. You're the only thing that changed. I'm the only thing that changed. We know the ending now. That's why it's obvious. That knowledge irreversibly altered how we perceive everything that came before it. And this is hindsight bias. It's one of the most powerful and dangerous cognitive forces operating inside post-incident investigations. In the last 2 lessons, we examined how the 5 whys imposes linear causality on nonlinear systems, and how the word why itself triggers defensiveness that shuts down learning. In this lesson, we're going to examine something even more insidious: how knowledge of an outcome rewrites our understanding of the past, and how the 5 whys is structurally designed to amplify that distortion. The formal study of hindsight bias begins in 1975 with psychologist Baruch Fischoff, working with Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Fischoff conducted a series of experiments in which participants evaluated historical events. Some participants were told how the events turned out and others were not. Participants who knew the outcome consistently rated that outcome as having been far more likely than participants who did not. Crucially, they were unaware that outcome knowledge was biasing their judgment. Fischoff calls this phenomenon creeping determinism. In hindsight, people come to see events as not only inevitable, but as having appeared inevitable all along. They believe that others should have been able to anticipate what happened far more than was actually possible at the time. This belief is not a harmless illusion. Once an outcome feels predictable, the next conclusion follows automatically. Someone should have predicted it, and if someone should have predicted it and did not, the explanation becomes more personal: carelessness, negligence, poor judgment. Now we start looking down on them. Oh, you were just too young to have seen it, my son. You didn't see it when you were this age either. Well, decades of research have shown that awareness does not eliminate hindsight bias. You cannot unknow an outcome. Once you know how a story ends, you cannot return to the perspective of not knowing. I mean, if you're good at forgetting things, that's a different story. Or if you're watching movies and you weren't sober, then sometimes you can get surprised every time. Anyway, this connects directly to the 5 whys. The method begins with the outcome and works backward. Every answer it generates is contaminated by outcome knowledge before the first question is asked. Contamination. Sidney Dekker identified 3 mechanisms by which hindsight bias distorts investigations. First, hindsight makes tangled histories appear linear. When we know the outcome, we reorganize the complex, ambiguous sequences of events into clean chains that appear to lead inevitably to failure. The 5 whys does not merely allow this, it requires it, because each why produces a single because, compressing complexity into a straight line. Second, hindsight strips decisions from their context. Investigators evaluate actions against what they now know was the correct course of action, rather than against the information, pressures, and uncertainty present at the time. Once context is removed, decisions appear obviously wrong. Third is the counterfactual trap. Counterfactuals describe what did not happen but supposedly should have. They should have checked. They should have escalated. These statements feel analytical, but they explain nothing about why people actually did what they did. They construct an imaginary world and use it to judge the real one. The 5 whys generates counterfactuals at every step. Each answer implies that if something had been different, the failure would not have occurred. This creates a false sense of understanding and premature closure. Research by David Woods and colleagues distilled the problem into a simple principle. Knowledge of outcome biases judgments about process. The same actions are judged as competent when they succeed and negligent when they fail. Human error becomes an attribution made after the fact, not a discovery made during analyses. Decker argues that the central question of investigation is not what went wrong, but why did actions make sense to people at the time? Answering that question requires reconstructing the unfolding situation as it appeared before the outcome was known. James Reason proposed a practical test for distinguishing personal failure from systemic conditions. Substitute the individual involved with another equally qualified person and ask whether that person would likely have behaved differently under the same circumstances. When the answer is no, and it usually is, the problem is not the person, it's the situation. Todd Conklin summarized this insight succinctly. Cause is a retrospective construct. Workers don't cause failure. They trigger weaknesses already present in the system. Consider a medication error in a hospital. A nurse administers the wrong medication, resulting in harm. The 5 whys begins with the outcome and works backward, framing each step in terms of what the nurse failed to do. Context, staffing levels, system usability, workload, organizational pressures, that's all stripped away. Blame accumulates even though another competent nurse in the same situation would likely have made the same decision. The method compresses a complex system failure into a linear story that feels satisfying but explains almost nothing. Decker argues that effective investigation requires getting inside the tunnel, reconstructing the world as it appeared to those involved at the time. This means asking how the situation unfolded, what information was available, and what constraints shaped behavior. I'll say that again. What constraints shaped behavior? That's so often missing from evaluations of incidents. The investigator's task is not to judge people for lacking hindsight, but to understand their local rationality, the logic of their decisions given what they knew and faced at that time. So hindsight bias cannot be eliminated. Any investigation that begins with the outcome operates inside a cognitively distorted environment. The 5 whys amplifies this distortion through linear structure, context-stripping questions, and counterfactual reasoning. It does not reveal causes, it constructs them. The goal of investigation is not to find someone to blame, it's to understand what conditions need to change. And hindsight guarantees that those two goals will always point in opposite directions.